I don't think I have an unpopular opinion. Do you guys think I might have an unpopular opinion? When Tom invites me to a game, I'll wear it for a whole service. How's that? So far, the restraining order says he has to invite me. So, I'm kidding. My name is Mike Lawrence. I am lead pastor here at Faith Community Church. We like to have fun here. You know what? I think joy includes laughter. And so I've always felt that way. Hey, we are in a series called Unpopular Opinion. It's about these concepts, these thoughts, these statements that Jesus made. Matthew recorded them. Matthew was a guy that was trained by Jesus, left his career to follow Jesus, wrote this gospel, this story about Jesus. And he recorded these statements that Jesus made that at the time were supremely unpopular. We now build our lives on them. But they weren't that popular in the beginning. And we've been taking a look at those, kind of unpackaging why they were unpopular and what they mean to us today. This morning, there is so much to say in the passage that we're going to look at. Now, in order for me to, I just want to jump right into it. You know, we are going to talk about why some of you get paid extra money on a Sunday. We are going to talk about Jesus and the gang, the lawbreakers. Right? And I'm going to talk about it at a point in my life when my spiritual tribe, I feel, blew it big. All right. So God, I want to thank you. We have this moment to just be together, to talk about you, Jesus. God, I love talking about Jesus, and it's such a privilege to be able to do that, to think I'm taking the words of Jesus and repeating them to today. So Jesus, what I want to do is I want to give integrity to your words in the 21st century, and I need your Spirit to cross that bridge for me. And Lord, I love it when I hear people say, it was like God speaking right to me, because I know that's not me, and that doesn't have to do anything with me. So would you break loose this morning by your Spirit in such a way that you change our hearts? I love you, Lord. Amen. So we are in this Gospel of Matthew. I'd encourage you to open up whether it's whatever mobile device you have, open up your Bible app, go to Matthew, pick number 12. That's the chapter that we're going to go into. We're going to dive right into it from the beginning. At that time, so what this means, at that time, is a literary clue from Matthew. What he's trying to say to you is this connects to the stuff that went before. Now, if you remember last week, he said at that time then too. So he's pulling together this long string of passages. And he's trying to help us understand how they connect. Because remember, 2 weeks ago, we talked about people who are having a crisis of faith. And then last week, Jesus talked about what to do when you have a crisis of faith, how he offers an approach to God that he considers light, easy to bear, something that give your very soul a rest that goes beyond today and into even eternity. Right? He said all that. He said he could do that because he has a unique relationship with God, and we're really going to unpack that last statement today because Jesus is now going to start moving forward with who he believes he is and what he can do as a result of that. It's not just who Jesus believed that he was, but it's like how his followers believed it as well. So at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. And a Sabbath is a concept that was really important to the Jews of Jesus' day. It started roughly around sunset on Friday, and it went to roughly around sunset on Saturday, and you weren't supposed to work. And people still follow that today. Matter of fact, if you go to Israel, there are some Orthodox hotels where, you can't check out during the Sabbath. So you got to plan accordingly. That's how seriously that they take this concept of Sabbath. And in America, we used, if you ever heard the concept blue laws were to protect the Sabbath. And it's why some places have to pay you more for working on a Sunday. So this ancient practice has washed all the way up onto the American shores in the 21st century. Now, his disciples are hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and to eat them. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said, "Look, your disciples are doing what's unlawful on the Sabbath." This is the point. It was actually law to not work on the Sabbath. Now, we're going to look at that's kind of a complicated statement because what actually is the law when it comes to work? And how do you define that? We'll get to that in a minute. So now, Jesus answers to them, haven't you read what David did when he and his companions are hungry? They entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. Jesus is fighting fire with fire. He's using the Bible to address a biblical issue. And he goes all the way back into their history. He picks out this guy who was one of the greatest kings in their history. His name is David, right? And David he was considered doing an act of treason by the existing king of that day. He gathered his followers and he went on the lam. He took off, trying to get away from being killed and being caught from the king. They took off so fast, they didn't take provisions with them. So they go to the temple, the center of their worship. They find the highest priest, and they're like, look, we got nothing to eat. Can you help us? And the priest says, gosh, all we got are like these 12 loaves of bread that are actually dedicated to God. They're so sacred to us that we put them into the temple on a table, and we're not supposed to touch them. But I'll give them to you. It was against the law to do that. And yet they all admire David. So you get the Pharisees, they're like, well, yeah, but. And then Jesus goes, or haven't you heard in the law that the priests on Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath and yet are innocent? It's like, what? He's like, they're working on the Sabbath. You know, like you come to church on a Sunday, guess what? The staff is working. And so Jesus is kind of pointing out, your approach to God is a little bit complicated, right? Because what does work mean? You like going to the temple on the Sabbath to worship God, but everyone who's helping you there is working. Now you're telling me that my disciples who are hungry and took a few heads of grain and broke them up to eat them were breaking the law? Because this approach to God that the Pharisees had started to develop was a rule for everything. But the truth is, you can't have a rule for everything. Life is too complicated. And the minute you think your rule covers a situation, guess what happens? Another situation arises. And so they had laws with subpoints. Matter of fact, it got to a point where there was over 600 laws you had to obey in order to be right with God. That's what this approach to God does. It kind of drives you down a rabbit hole. Now, Jesus goes on. I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. There are three really, really unpopular opinions that Jesus just said. I'm going to break them down for you. Hang in with me because we're going to actually dive into the Bible that Jesus read. We call it the Old Testament. And there's going to be a little bit of some complicated thought in that. But Jesus is talking to some high-level thinkers, and so he's going to jump on their platform to show them that, guys, I can play on this platform with you. Jesus says, first, I tell you that something greater than the temple is here, which is huge. Because the temple was the center of worship for the whole nation. People went on pilgrimage to get to the temple because they believed that God lived there in a special way. Out of all the buildings and all of the places of worship in all the world, they believed the Creator actually dwells here. And so we go there to worship him. And when Jesus says, there's something greater than the temple here, and they're all like, what? What are you doing? I don't see anything. And they're looking around. Jesus is like, me. That's what he's saying. Take that apart. It's a little nuanced. When Jesus is saying something greater than the temple is here, he's like, guys, the center of your worship, the place where God dwells, where you say all nations will come to one day, that people go pilgrimage to, guess what? It now has feet. I'm here, and I'm greater than the temple. That's very unpopular. I honestly think they got a little confused. They probably walked away and then went, hey, wait a minute. Where'd he go? Because they got it, right? Now he says, this is connected. So I'm going to jump to the bottom of this paragraph. For the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. And there's stuff in there that in our world it's hard for us to connect to because these titles are extremely important in Jesus' day, but not as important or as knowledgeable to us in our day. Son of Man. This is where this comes from. In Jesus' day, there's a movement that was really tearing apart some of the parts of Jesus' Bible that were called prophecy. Talking about what God was doing in the world and was going to be doing in the future. And they had this little obscure passage out of a book called Daniel that was really meaningful to them because it talked about Son of Man. In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man. What that means is like somebody who seemed human, right? Coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days, that's God, and was led into his presence, which is a huge deal because nobody went into the presence of God because humans were afraid of God. He was fearsome. He was given authority, glory, sovereign power. Those are the qualities of God. All nations and people of every language worshiped him. Huge deal. You don't worship human beings. So now they're beginning to say, like, he looked human. He was able to go in the presence of God without fear. He shared the qualities of God. People began to worship him like God, all from all over the world. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will never pass away. His kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. And what he's saying is like this person was able to establish a society that would wrap itself around the world. It was really life as God had designed it to live. And Jesus calls himself the Son of Man often. This was a real important title. Jesus was constantly throwing this clue out to people as to who he is. Rather than sometimes saying it directly, it's like, okay, all you Bible scholars, he throws this out, and there'll be the real, like, in-tune Bible scholars like, what did he just say? Jesus applies this to himself. And then he says the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. See, the Sabbath actually didn't start from humans. We have this thing called the Ten Commandments, which God established a constitution for the nation of Israel. It was kind of the core defining, like for our Bill of Rights and our Constitution, they called it the law, right, for them. And in the center of it were 10 commandments, and those 10 commandments were the foundation to everything that came off of it. And they believed that God gave that to them, and the Sabbath came out of that. It was like the 4th out of 10 commandments. Which is kind of, what I always find is humorous? God only gets, do these 10 things and you'll be okay. Like we couldn't even do one of them well. Right? Listen to this. Remember the Sabbath day. This is from their constitution. This is from the 10 Commandments. Keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor. Do all your work. On the 7th day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. You know what Jesus is saying? The Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus is saying, we all get it, right? The Sabbath is a day where you stop working so that you can worship God. You pour all your attention, all your energy into resting and to worship God. The Son of Man is the Lord of Sabbath. That is, okay, high schoolers, we're gonna go, I know it's gonna freak you out. It's like English class. Is a linking verb, right? It means like equals. Son of Man equals Lord of the Sabbath, Jesus is saying. And Jesus is thinking about himself. Jesus, if you put it all together, is like, I am this unique person. I'm a person who goes into the presence of God because I share the qualities of God. And God has given me the mission to establish his kingdom, his reign, his domain, whatever you want to call it, his society that wraps itself around the world so that people might live life the way that God designed it. And this Sabbath thing that you're talking about, that was supposed to focus on the Lord and show God respect and worship, it's me. Really unpopular opinion. We're going to see how unpopular it becomes. Then he says something in the middle of that whole thing we talked about where he says, remember, we talked about if you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Jesus is actually poking at these Bible scholars. He goes, you know what, guys? For all that you know about the Bible, you've forgotten something really important. And then he quotes from their Bible, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. It comes from another place in their Bible, written by a different person called Hosea, and this is what Hosea says. For I desire steadfast love, not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. So let's get a couple things. Jesus said, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. This says, a desire steadfast love, not sacrifice. It's because Jesus was quoting from their Greek Bible. One of the things that people always do is they translate the scriptures into languages that people can read. And in his day, Greek was really popular, so they had translated it into Greek. And this word steadfast love translated into mercy. What this is from their Hebrew Bible. And that word steadfast love, my favorite word in Jesus' Bible. It's a word called chesed. It is the core virtue of God's character. It is the definition of God. It's a word that is so profound and so complex that we can't really translate it into English. There are words like that, right? The only way that I can think of how to describe this word, we think of God's love as like a faucet. You turn it on and you can fill up the glass and you can drink it. They think of God's love like Niagara Falls, right? Where God's love just comes pouring over you and washing away your past and cleaning you up. And it was just a never-ending source of his powerful, majestic, transforming, all good, justice-bringing love that was going to change the world. And Jesus is saying to them, now when he quotes them, he only says half of the verse. Because I think he knows you guys have got the second half down. Right? The knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. They knew about God. They gave their lives to studying the Bible. But these men, these people, were so knowledgeable about God that somehow along the way they forgot the other half of the verse was that you're supposed to be compassionate. When he says, I desire steadfast love, not sacrifice, Jesus is saying, don't you understand what God is like? Your rituals are so important to you. But do you understand? I desire compassion more than I desire your rituals. I want you to know me more than know about me and just do the right things. Somewhere along the line, they'd gotten to the point where they believed that knowing about God and doing the right things was the most important thing, but what they had not noticed was that love was draining from their souls. It's amazing. Isn't it amazing that you can be so devoted to God and not be loving? I mean, they condemned the disciples. They were just hungry. Walking through a field where there was food within arm's reach. And their attitude was, well, then go hungry. They had this finely crafted theology, they had tuned their lives to the right practices, and yet they were in the middle of a crisis of faith and they didn't realize it. I'm going to tell you what I mean. There's this thing in biology, right? If you cover AI, and you put this one finger in the right spot and you're looking forward. No, don't do this now, right? And as I'm finish the speaking, don't go Google it and try to figure out, not working, right? But if you move it around, you know what you find? Top of your finger disappears. Because in the back of your eyeballs is a place where there are no rods and cones, where all the nerve bundle comes in. And it's actually a blind spot in your eye. Because you have two eyes, it compensates. Your brain literally fills in the spot. You can think you're seeing, but you really have a blind spot. We have blind spots in our lives. You think your marriage is great until your wife leaves you. You think your family is awesome until your kid says, I just can't stand being around you. You think the business is going great until they sit down and they show you the books. You think your faith is wild until you realize love has drained itself from your body. You don't know it until somebody points it out. And here's the thing. Rarely does a person take that well. We'll tell you, we'll see how it plays out. So going on from that place, this is later the same day, he went to their synagogue. So Jesus joined them in these little gatherings within their communities where they would open up the Bible and pray and do some worship because not everybody could get to the temple, right? He went in there. It was the Sabbath. A man with a shriveled hand was there. This is to show you how blind they are. Matthew writes, looking for a reason to bring charges against Jesus, they say, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? How can you even ask that question? You know what they're doing? They're trying to set Jesus up. Here's what they're thinking. Well, the law says you're not supposed to heal somebody on the Sabbath because healing is working. Just ask a doctor, right? Now, there's a person there with a shriveled hand. And we know Jesus is so compassionate, I bet you he breaks the law and we can throw him in jail. Do you follow that logic? Jesus is so compassionate, we'll be able to send him to jail. So how's it play out? Jesus says something, because they asked the question, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And Jesus knows they're setting him up. And Jesus goes, well, let me ask you a question. If any of you had a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? Their law, like I said, had multiple subpoints. One of their subpoints was, you know what? That sheep, which is important to your livelihood, if it falls into a pit and it's in danger of dying, go ahead and lift it out. It's okay to do that on the Sabbath. That's what they're saying. Now, Jesus goes, but how much more valuable is a person than a sheep? A little technical difficulty there. Jesus is like, how much more important do you think that sheep is to God than a person? And, you're kind of caught now in a little bit of bind because you're supposed to say the person is more important than the sheep. Now, here's the thing. Their law did have another subpoint. That other subpoint said, you know what, if it's a life-threatening situation, okay, you can do something. This guy's not in a life-threatening situation. So what's Jesus going to do? Jesus goes, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. And he said to the man, stretch out your hand. I think Jesus is sick of this. He's like, honestly, guys, here's a man with a shriveled hand. I'm supposed to be able to help this man with his deformity. I can help this man with his deformity. And you're telling me I should say, come back tomorrow? I think it's okay to do good as an act of worship. And heals him. He stretched it out and was completely restored, just as sound as the other. And the crowd went wild. No, they didn't. The Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus because he was compassionate on the Sabbath, because he healed a man with a deformed hand. How do you get to a point in your religious devotion where you'd be willing to kill somebody because they healed a person on the Sabbath? None of them thought that what they were doing was wrong. What they all thought was they're doing the right thing. And this is how you can honor God. It's their blind spot. They don't see that they have it. Now, just to be fair, you need to understand how important the Sabbath is. There was a legend in their day. It comes out of this work that they had called First Maccabees. It was written about this revolt that had happened when the Jews were trying to push back this foreign power that had kind of come into their country. And in that legend, right, the soldiers that they were fighting, the enemy, knew their devotion to the Sabbath. And there was this one holdout. It was like a cave area, and where all these families were, and there was a bunch of men that were really good at fighting, and they were protecting their families. They were part of the revolt. They'd been chased into this cave. And you know what the enemy commander said? We'll wait till the Sabbath, and we'll tackle them then and see what happens. Because the Sabbath meant you can't work, and fighting is working. And so the legend says that they brought their family together, and they say, God will defend us. We will honor God, and we will not pick up our weapons. And the enemy came in and slaughtered every man, woman, and child because they wouldn't fight on the Sabbath. And the legend was something that they admired. Their commitment was, we would rather die than break the Sabbath. We would rather die than save our women and children. They considered that devoted. How do you get to that place? It's a blind spot, right? It's a place in your life where you don't realize that for all the practices and knowledge that you've gained, love is draining from your soul. The Pharisees were at a place in life where they were thinking, you know what? it's better to go hungry, and it's better to let people suffer than it is to take care of that stuff on the Sabbath. It's hard, isn't it? I mean, in our story, we don't know why the man was crippled. We don't know if he was crippled from birth. We don't know if it was a work accident that crippled him. We don't know if it was a punishment that crippled him. But we do know this, that typically in that day, especially if you were born crippled or something happened in your life where you were crippled, you were considered judged by God. And this is your judgment, the suffering. Jesus turns it around and goes, it's not judgment, it's an opportunity for mercy. And shows mercy to them. In my life, I have actually seen Jesus in action in people's lives in major ways, and like what I would call remarkable. And I'm going to paint some pictures for you that may be hard for you to get your head around, but that's okay because the Pharisees could not get their head around the things that Jesus was doing of their day. I remember I was in Lebanon because our church had done this real super generous thing. We had raised like $250,000 to help Syrian refugees. They were war refugees. They walked out of Syria, came into Lebanon, and Lebanon was overwhelmed by their presence. And this global Christian relief organization called World Vision stepped in and was bringing relief. And because we gave so much money, they're like, hey, you should send your pastor over and to see how your money's being used. So I went. It was a real privilege. And we're walking through this refugee settlement, which was the size of a village, right? And World Vision had provided tents and was bringing in food and clean water and helping with the sanitation and trying to educate at least the youngest of their children because these kids weren't getting any education whatsoever. As we're walking through it and we're talking, and they're like, it's mostly an Islamic representation. And it's like, wow, that's really cool. Because we're Christians, and Christians in America don't always have the highest regard towards Islam, but they're like, they're Christian Islam. And they said, and one of the challenges we have is that we know that there are pockets of terrorist cells in this campground. We don't even know, we don't know who they are, but we know that in situations like this, terrorist organizations will come and set up cell groups in which they begin to recruit people in. I'm like, wow, what do you do for that? And they're like, we feed them. Like, we don't know who they are. So we give them food, we give them clean water and sanitation, blah, blah. I'm like, you do? And they're like, of course we do. Because it's the compassionate thing to do. And when they ask us why, we talk about Christ. Because our compassion opens the door for discussion about Christ and maybe could pull them out of a world of violence. It's like, isn't that what Jesus would do? Right? Now, there was a time in my life where I think we were actually on the Pharisee side. When I say we, I mean my spiritual tribe. And I come out of a movement in Christianity called evangelicalism. And there's a lot of good around it. And evangelicals are really about how much you know. Right? And then in the 90s, there was this crisis that broke out in America and even around the world. It was the HIV Aids Crisis. Right? It struck largely in the LGBTQ community and among people who are addicts using infected needles. It would also impact others, like, if you had a blood transfer that was infected, they didn't know about that back then, or babies that were born to somebody who had HIV AIDS also came out with it. And as a community, you know how the evangelicals largely responded? Some of our leaders condemned them. This is God's judgment for you. Your suffering is an evidence that God is judging you for your behavior. What does that sound like? And then most of us were just confused and didn't know what to do. So you know what we did when we were confused? Nothing. Here's a whole host of people who were suffering and dying from a disease, and we were throwing up signs at football games that said John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that should ever believe in him should not perish but have eternal life. But we wouldn't go into the hospitals or into the families that were suffering from HIV AIDS because we didn't know what to do or we were condemning them. How do we get to that point? Maybe that's just my unpopular opinion. We had a blind spot. I think we had a blind spot. There's only two things I know to do when you have a blind spot. One thing is I think you need to get around people. So we call them faith groups in our church, a small group of people who study the Bible, speak into your lives, pray with you, do good with you, right? And I think you need to be in a faith group with a group of people who speak to you because you can't see your blind spots. Like the old story of the king with no clothes, right? Thinking that he was finely dressed and really he was naked and ashamed. Well, you go into a group of people who will speak into your life and show you where your blind spots are. Now, here's the thing. Here's the key to a really helpful faith group in revealing your blind spots. You shouldn't all think the same. Because then you're protecting your blind spots. If your faith group, if everyone has the same political persuasion of you, they're not going to point out your blind spots as well. Right? If everybody comes out of the same spiritual background you do, they're not going to point out your blind spots. You know what's really cool is to have some people in your faith group who are exploring Christ and not even sure they believe this, so they can point out your blind spots. Because sometimes the world around us does a really great job of pointing out Christians' blind spots. But the thing is it requires a tremendous amount of humility. Because most often, when someone points out your blind spot, you know how you react? With anger. You're defensive. You resist it. You know what happened when I was talking about some of our examples? You were like, no way. I'll guarantee that there was someone in this room, the only reason you didn't walk out was because you didn't want to draw attention to yourself. You think maybe God's pushing out a blind spot? Being in a faith group that's committed to you and loves you, but doesn't always think just like you, may be exactly what you need. And prayer. I think prayer is important because you can't see it, but the Spirit can begin to reveal it. The Spirit can start to develop the courage and the humility to face these blind spots and then give you something to do with it. Here's a prayer for you. Take it or leave it. I think you could use it this week. But there are times I tell you there are dangerous prayers. This is a dangerous prayer. Father, show me my blind spots. Give me the courage to face them. Show me in my life what's the most loving thing for me to do right now. And give me the courage to do it when I don't want to. What a dangerous prayer. Matter of fact, here's the thing. I'm going to pray it in front of you. You can pray it out loud or you can pray it silently. You don't have to pray it at all. Well, let's just all take a moment. Let's kind of close this time with this prayer. Father, will you show me my blind spots? Give me the courage, Lord, to face them. Show me in my life what's the most loving thing for me to do right now. And give me the courage to do it when I don't want to. Lord, I love you. And I trust you with this moment. God, as I prayed that prayer, there was a little bit of fear and trembling inside of me because I don't know what you're going to show me. I really do pray for the courage that I would respond with humility and listen and to carefully reflect on if it's coming from you. Be kind to everyone in this room. Touch us in a way that is truly divine. Supernatural through your Holy Spirit. Amen.